Robert had been driving the same school bus route for 15 years. Every morning at 6:30, he would start his big yellow bus and begin his familiar journey through the neighborhoods of Pine Valley. He knew every stop, every pothole, and most importantly, he knew every child who climbed aboard his bus. The morning routine was always the same. First stop was on Maple Street, where twin brothers would race each other to the bus door. Second stop brought 3 chatty middle schoolers who always sat in the back rows. Third stop was where old Mrs. Chen would wave from her porch as her grandson hurried down the walkway. Robert had memorized all their faces, their personalities, and their little habits. But 3 weeks ago, something changed at his 4th stop on Oak Avenue. A new passenger started riding his bus, a small 8-year-old girl with braided hair and a bright pink backpack. What caught Robert's attention wasn't her arrival itself, but the state she was in every single morning. The first day he noticed her, she climbed the steps slowly, her eyes red and puffy. Robert thought maybe she was just having a bad morning. Kids sometimes cried about leaving home or being nervous about school. He gave her his usual warm smile and said good morning, but she barely looked up. She chose a seat in the 3rd row and sat down quietly, clutching her backpack like it was the most precious thing in the world. The second day, the same thing happened. Red eyes, quiet demeanor, and that same tight grip on her backpack. By the 3rd day, Robert started paying closer attention. This wasn't just a case of morning blues or first-day jitters. This little girl was genuinely upset about something, and it was happening every single day. Her name was Lily, he learned from hearing other kids talk to her. She lived in the apartment complex at the end of Oak Avenue with her grandmother. Every morning he would see an elderly woman in a purple housecoat standing by the bus stop, watching as Lily walked toward the bus. The woman always looked tired, and Robert noticed she would watch the bus drive away with a worried expression on her face. What troubled Robert most was how Lily would cry during the entire bus ride. Not loud sobbing that would draw attention from other children, but quiet tears that would just roll down her cheeks as she stared out the window. She would try to wipe them away when she thought no one was looking, but Robert could see everything from his big rearview mirror. The other kids on the bus started noticing too. At first, some of the younger children would point and whisper, but Robert quickly put a stop to that with a gentle reminder about being kind to everyone. The older kids seemed to understand that something serious was going on. A few of them tried to talk to Lily, offering her tissues or asking if she was okay, but she would just shake her head and continue looking out the window. Robert found himself thinking about Lily even when he wasn't driving. During his lunch breaks, he would wonder what was making this child so sad. During his evening walks with his dog, he would think about those tears and that tight grip on her backpack. His wife noticed he was distracted and asked what was bothering him. "There's this little girl on my route," Robert explained one evening over dinner. "Every day for 3 weeks now she gets on the bus crying. Not just upset, but really deeply sad about something. I've never seen anything like it in all my years of driving." His wife suggested he talk to the school counselor, but Robert wasn't sure that was his place. He was just the bus driver. His job was to get kids safely to and from school, not to get involved in their personal problems. But something about Lily's situation felt different. The sadness in her eyes was too deep for someone so young. As the days continued, Robert started noticing other details. Lily's clothes were always clean and neat, but she seemed to wear the same few outfits repeatedly. Her lunch appeared to be very simple, usually just crackers and a small juice box. Most days she wouldn't even finish eating, instead wrapping the crackers back up and putting them in her backpack. The thing that worried Robert most was how Lily seemed to flinch whenever the other kids got loud or playful around her. If someone laughed too loudly or if the boys in the back started roughhousing, she would shrink into her seat and grip her backpack even tighter. It was like she was expecting something bad to happen at any moment. Robert also noticed that when they arrived at school each morning, Lily was never in a hurry to get off the bus. While other kids would jump up and rush toward the door, excited to start their day, Lily would sit in her seat until almost everyone else had left. Then she would slowly gather her things and walk to the front of the bus with her head down. "Have a good day, Lily," Robert would say each morning, hoping to get at least a small smile from her. Sometimes she would nod slightly, but she never spoke, never smiled. Just walked down those bus steps carrying whatever heavy burden was weighing on her young shoulders. The afternoon rides were even worse. When Robert picked up the kids after school, Lily would be one of the last ones to board. Teachers would sometimes have to encourage her to get on the bus, and Robert could see them speaking to her gently before she climbed the steps. Once she was in her usual seat, the tears would start again, sometimes even more intense than in the morning. During these afternoon rides, Robert noticed that Lily would often reach into her backpack and pull out what looked like a small notebook. She would hold it close to her chest and sometimes whisper things too quietly for anyone to hear. Other kids might have been curious about what she was doing, but by now they had all learned to give her space during her quiet moments. Robert started arriving at work a little earlier each morning, hoping to catch a glimpse of Lily's home situation. He would park his bus and walk around the vehicle, doing his safety check while watching the apartment complex. He could see the grandmother helping Lily get ready, making sure her backpack was properly packed and her jacket was zipped up. The older woman moved slowly like someone carrying her own heavy burden. 3 weeks turned into 4, and Robert knew he couldn't just keep watching anymore. This wasn't a phase that was going to pass. Whatever was causing Lily's tears wasn't getting better, and if anything, she seemed to be getting sadder with each passing day. Robert had transported thousands of children over his 15-year career, and he had developed a sixth sense about when something was seriously wrong. That Friday afternoon, as he watched Lily walk slowly to her grandmother's arms at the bus stop, Robert made a decision. He was going to find out what was making this little girl so heartbroken, and if there was anything he could do to help, he was going to do it. Sometimes being just the bus driver meant being the one person who saw what others missed, and Robert was determined not to let Lily's silent suffering continue without someone caring enough to act. Robert's weekend was restless. Every time he tried to relax, his mind kept drifting back to Lily and those tears that seemed to flow endlessly during his bus rides. He found himself telling his wife more details about the situation, describing how the little girl would clutch that pink backpack and stare out the window with such deep sadness. "Maybe you should talk to her grandmother," his wife suggested, while they were having their Sunday morning coffee. "If you're seeing her every day, you might notice things that others don't." Robert considered this idea, but he wasn't sure how to approach such a delicate situation. What would he say? How do you tell someone you're worried about their grandchild without sounding like you're interfering where you don't belong? Monday morning arrived, and Robert found himself watching even more carefully as he approached Lily's stop. The grandmother was there as usual, standing beside the small girl in her purple housecoat. But this time Robert noticed something he hadn't seen before. The older woman's hands were shaking as she helped adjust Lily's backpack, and she kept glancing around nervously, as if she was worried about something. When Lily climbed onto the bus, Robert could see that her crying had intensified over the weekend. Her eyes were more swollen than usual, and she moved even slower than before. She took her regular seat and immediately pulled out that small notebook from her backpack. This time, Robert could see her lips moving as she whispered something while holding the notebook close to her heart. The other children on the bus had developed their own routine around Lily's sadness. The younger kids would speak in hushed tones when they got near her seat. The older children had started bringing extra tissues and would quietly leave them on the seat beside her before getting off at school. Nobody asked questions anymore, but Robert could see that they all cared about this crying girl who rode their bus every day. During the ride to school, Robert found himself adjusting his rearview mirror more frequently to check on Lily. She seemed smaller somehow, like she was trying to disappear into her seat. Her tears fell steadily, and every few minutes she would wipe her face with the sleeve of her jacket. The notebook remained pressed against her chest throughout the entire journey. When they arrived at Riverside Elementary, Robert noticed something new. Instead of waiting for all the other children to leave first, Lily actually tried to get off the bus quickly, but as soon as her feet hit the pavement, she froze. Robert watched through his side mirror as she stood there for several long moments, just staring at the school building. A teacher had to come over and gently guide her toward the entrance. The afternoon pickup brought even more concerning observations. When Robert arrived at the school, he could see Lily sitting alone on a bench outside the main office. While other children were laughing and playing as they waited for their buses, she sat perfectly still with that notebook in her lap. Her shoulders were shaking, and Robert realized she was crying again. Ms. Patterson, the school principal, walked over to Lily and knelt down beside her. Robert couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see the principal speaking softly while Lily shook her head repeatedly. Whatever Ms. Patterson was asking, Lily wasn't ready to share. Eventually, the principal helped her stand up and walked her to Robert's bus. "She's having a tough time today," Ms. Patterson said quietly to Robert as Lily climbed the steps. "We're keeping an eye on her, but she won't tell us what's wrong." This conversation confirmed what Robert had been thinking. The school staff had noticed Lily's distress too, but they were just as puzzled as he was about the cause. Whatever was troubling this little girl, she was keeping it locked inside, and it was eating away at her day by day. On Tuesday, Robert decided to try a different approach. Instead of just saying good morning when Lily boarded the bus, he made a point of speaking to her when she got off at school. "I hope you have a really good day today, Lily," he said with the warmest smile he could manage. "Remember, if you ever need to talk to someone, I'm always here." Lily paused for just a moment and looked directly at him. For the first time in weeks, she made eye contact. Her eyes were filled with such sadness that Robert felt his heart break a little. She opened her mouth as if she might say something, but then closed it again and hurried off the bus. That small moment of connection gave Robert hope, but it also made him more determined to understand what was happening. During his lunch break, he drove back through Lily's neighborhood not to spy, but to get a better sense of her living situation. The apartment complex where she lived was older but well-maintained. There were children playing in the courtyard, and Robert could see that it was the kind of place where neighbors looked out for each other. He parked across the street and watched for a few minutes. Through a second-floor window, he could see movement in what he assumed was Lily's apartment. The grandmother appeared briefly at the window, and Robert was struck by how frail she looked. This was clearly an older woman trying to care for a young child while dealing with her own challenges. Wednesday brought a new development that alarmed Robert even more. When Lily got on the bus that morning, he noticed that her usual pink backpack looked fuller than normal. It was bulging at the sides, and she held it even more protectively than usual. During the ride, she kept checking the zipper, making sure it was completely closed. At school that day, Robert happened to see Lily during lunch period when he was dropping off some papers at the main office. She was sitting alone at a table in the cafeteria, and instead of eating the school lunch, she was carefully rationing out crackers from a small bag. She would eat one cracker, then wrap the rest back up and put them in her backpack. It was clear that she was saving food, but Robert couldn't understand why. The image of that little girl rationing crackers stayed with Robert all day. That evening, he called his brother-in-law, who worked as a social worker in the next county. "What would make an 8-year-old start hoarding food?" Robert asked, describing what he had observed. His brother-in-law's answer was sobering. "Usually it means the child has experienced food insecurity at some point. They start saving food because they're worried about when their next meal might come. It could also be a sign of trauma or major life changes that have made them feel like they can't depend on adults to meet their basic needs." This conversation opened Robert's eyes to possibilities he hadn't considered. Maybe Lily's tears weren't just about being sad. Maybe she was dealing with real fear about her basic survival and security. Thursday morning, Robert paid even closer attention to every detail. He noticed that Lily's clothes, while still clean, were definitely being worn multiple days in a row. Her shoes had small holes that had been carefully covered with tape. Most telling of all, when she pulled out her usual notebook during the ride, Robert caught a glimpse of what was inside. The pages were covered with careful handwriting in purple crayon. From his angle in the driver's seat, he couldn't read the words, but he could see that every page was filled. This wasn't just a regular school notebook. This was something much more personal and important to Lily. During the afternoon ride, disaster struck. As the bus hit a particularly large pothole, Lily's overstuffed backpack burst open. Contents spilled across the floor of the bus, and Lily immediately began crying harder than Robert had ever seen. She frantically tried to gather everything up before the other children could see what had fallen out. Robert quickly pulled the bus over to a safe spot and put on the emergency brake. "Everyone stay in your seats for just a minute," he announced calmly. "We need to help Lily pick up her things." But as Robert walked back to help, what he saw scattered on the floor made him understand that this was much more serious than just a clumsy accident. Among the usual school supplies and saved crackers were several photographs, official-looking letters, and that notebook that Lily treasured so much. One photograph had landed face up, showing a young couple in military uniforms, both wearing bright smiles. Lily was desperately trying to gather everything while sobbing uncontrollably. The other children sat quietly, sensing that something very important and private had just been revealed. Robert gently helped Lily collect her belongings, being careful not to look too closely at the personal items, but knowing that he had just witnessed a clue to understanding her daily tears. By Friday, Robert knew he couldn't continue being just an observer. The scattered contents of that backpack had told him that Lily was carrying much more than school supplies. She was carrying memories, official documents, and what appeared to be her most treasured possessions. Combined with the food hoarding, the daily tears, and the careful way she protected that notebook, Robert was beginning to piece together a picture of a child dealing with profound loss. He decided that after his route was finished that Friday afternoon, he would do what he should have done weeks ago. He was going to find out exactly what was hidden in Lily's regular seat. And then he was going to figure out how to help this heartbroken little girl who had been suffering in silence for far too long. Friday afternoon couldn't come fast enough for Robert. All day he found himself thinking about that moment when Lily's backpack had burst open and scattered its contents across the bus floor. The image of those photographs and official papers kept replaying in his mind. Something told him that the answers to Lily's daily tears were hidden somewhere on his bus, and he was determined to find out what. After completing his afternoon route and dropping off the last student, Robert drove his bus back to the depot. Instead of heading straight home like he usually did, he parked in his usual spot and sat for a moment gathering his thoughts. He knew that what he was about to do might seem like an invasion of privacy, but his concern for Lily had reached a point where he couldn't ignore it anymore. Robert began his usual end-of-day routine of cleaning the bus, but this time with a specific purpose. He started at the front and worked his way back, checking under each seat for forgotten items and cleaning the surfaces. When he reached the third row on the left side, Lily's regular seat, he paused. This was the moment of truth. The seat looked ordinary from the outside, just like all the other green vinyl seats in his bus. But Robert had noticed over the weeks that Lily always positioned herself in a very specific way, often reaching down beside her seat during the ride. Now he understood why. Taking a deep breath, Robert lifted the seat cushion. What he found underneath made him gasp out loud and take a step backward. Hidden in the storage compartment beneath, the seat was a carefully arranged collection of items that told a story more heartbreaking than anything he could have imagined. The first thing he noticed was a small, stuffed elephant, gray and worn, with one ear missing and patches where the fabric had been lovingly repaired. Next to it were several notebooks, similar to the one Lily carried every day, each filled with page after page of careful handwriting in purple crayon. But what made Robert's hands tremble were the photographs arranged like a small shrine. There were pictures of a young couple in military uniforms, the same ones he had glimpsed when Lily's backpack spilled. In some photos, they were holding a much younger version of Lily, all three of them smiling brightly. There were pictures of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and family picnics. Each photograph showed a happy, complete family that clearly no longer existed. "We knew that Lily had lost her parents and was living with her grandmother," Ms. Patterson said quietly. "But we had no idea about the extent of her emotional struggle or the family's financial difficulties. Her grandmother enrolled her here about 4 months ago and mentioned that there had been some family changes, but she didn't provide many details." Robert explained about the correspondence he had seen regarding delayed benefits and bureaucratic complications. "It looks like they're entitled to support that they're not receiving, possibly because they don't know how to navigate the system, or because things are getting lost in red tape." Ms. Patterson immediately understood the implications. So Lily is not only grieving the loss of both parents, but she's also worried about her grandmother's ability to care for her, and afraid of being a burden. That explains so much about her behavior. Together, they developed a plan of action. Ms. Patterson would contact the school's social worker and grief counselor to ensure that Lily received appropriate support services. She would also reach out to local organizations that specialized in helping military families navigate benefit systems. Robert would approach Lily's grandmother directly, but carefully, to offer assistance without making her feel judged or overwhelmed. "The tricky part," Robert explained, "is that I discovered all of this by finding her hidden memorial. I don't want to violate her privacy or make her feel like her safe space has been invaded." Ms. Patterson agreed that this required delicate handling. "What if we approach it from the angle of general concern about her daily distress, rather than mentioning the specific items you found?" We can offer support based on what we've observed about her emotional state. That afternoon, Robert made a decision that had been weighing on his mind all day. Instead of waiting for the perfect moment or the right words, he decided to speak directly with Lily's grandmother when he dropped her off after school. He had noticed that the older woman always waited at the bus stop, and this would give him an opportunity to introduce himself properly. When the bus arrived at Lily's stop, Robert put on the parking brake and walked to the back where Lily was slowly gathering her things. "Lily," he said gently, "I was hoping I could say hello to your grandmother today. Is that okay with you?" Lily looked up at him with those sad eyes that had been haunting his thoughts for weeks. For a moment he thought she might shake her head, but then she nodded slightly. Together they walked to the front of the bus. Outside, Lily's grandmother was waiting as usual. Up close, Robert could see that she was indeed struggling. Her clothes were neat but worn, her hands trembled slightly, and she had the exhausted look of someone carrying too much weight on her shoulders. "Mrs. Chen?" Robert said as Lily ran to her grandmother's arms. "I'm Robert, Lily's bus driver. I was wondering if I could speak with you for just a moment." The older woman looked surprised but nodded. "Of course. Is everything all right? Has Lily been causing problems on the bus?" "Oh no, not at all," Robert said quickly. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you because I've been concerned about Lily. She seems very sad during our rides, and I was wondering if there's anything I or the school might be able to do to help." Mrs. Chen's composure crumbled almost immediately. Tears began flowing down her cheeks as she looked down at Lily, who had wrapped her arms around her grandmother's waist. "I don't know what to do anymore," Mrs. Chen whispered. "I'm trying so hard to take care of her, but everything is so complicated. The government papers, the benefits, the bills, I don't understand any of it. My son used to handle all these things, and Amy was so smart about paperwork, but now it's just me and I'm failing her." Robert's heart broke as he listened to this grandmother's confession. Here was a woman who had lost her son and daughter-in-law, inherited the responsibility of raising her granddaughter, and was drowning in bureaucratic complexities while grieving her own massive losses. "You're not failing her," Robert said firmly. "You're doing an incredible job under impossible circumstances. But you don't have to do it alone. There are people who can help with the paperwork and benefits. There are resources specifically designed for families like yours." Mrs. Chen looked up at him with a mixture of hope and desperation. "I've tried calling the numbers they gave me, but I get transferred from person to person and no one seems to know what I'm talking about. I spend hours on the phone and nothing gets resolved." Robert pulled out a small notebook and wrote down his phone number. "I have a friend who works in social services and my wife used to work with military families. We know people who specialize in exactly these kinds of situations. Would it be okay if I made some calls and found someone who could help you navigate the system?" "You would do that?" Mrs. Chen asked, looking amazed that a relative stranger would offer such assistance. "Mrs. Chen, I've been driving school buses for 15 years, and I've learned that sometimes the best thing we can do for children is help the adults who are caring for them. Lily is lucky to have you, but you shouldn't have to figure this out all by yourself." As they talked, Robert noticed that Lily was listening to every word. Her usual tears had stopped, and she was looking back and forth between her grandmother and Robert with an expression that might have been the beginning of hope. "There's something else," Mrs. Chen said hesitantly. "Lily has been having nightmares and crying at night. She tries to hide it from me, but I hear her talking to pictures of her parents. I don't know how to help her with her grief. I'm grieving too, and sometimes I'm afraid I'm making things worse for her." Robert knelt down so he was at Lily's eye level. "Lily, would it be okay if I helped your grandmother find someone who understands about losing people you love? Someone who knows how to help kids when they're feeling really sad?" For the first time in weeks, Lily spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper, but her words were clear. "Would they understand about missing my mommy and daddy?" "Yes," Robert said gently. "They would understand exactly how much you miss them and why it hurts so much. And they would help you learn ways to remember them that make you feel better instead of sadder." That evening, Robert made several phone calls. He contacted his wife's former colleague who worked with military families, a social worker friend who specialized in childhood grief, and a veterans advocate who helped families navigate benefit systems. By the end of the night, he had appointments scheduled and a list of resources that could address every aspect of what Lily and her grandmother were facing. He also called Ms. Patterson to update her on his conversation with Mrs. Chen. Together, they agreed that the school would provide additional support through counseling services, and would waive fees for breakfast and lunch programs to ensure Lily had consistent nutrition. As Robert prepared for bed that night, he felt a mixture of sadness and hope. Lily's situation was heartbreaking, but now that the truth was out in the open, real help could begin. The little girl who had been carrying such enormous grief and worry in silence would finally have adults working together to support her. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter for Lily, one where her tears might slowly be replaced by healing, and where the memorial under the bus seat could become part of a healthy grieving process rather than a hidden burden she carried alone. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it began the very next morning when Robert started his bus route. For the first time in over a month, he felt hopeful as he approached Lily's stop on Oak Avenue. Mrs. Chen was waiting with Lily as usual, but something was different about both of them. The grandmother stood a little straighter, and when Lily climbed onto the bus, she made brief eye contact with Robert before taking her seat. "Good morning, Lily," Robert said with genuine warmth. "I hope today is a good day for you." This time, instead of just nodding, Lily whispered a quiet good morning back. It was the first time she had responded to his greeting in all the weeks she had been riding his bus. The other children noticed too, and several of them smiled and waved at her as she passed their seats. Robert's phone calls from the previous evening had already started to bear fruit. Helen Rodriguez, a social worker who specialized in military families, had agreed to meet with Mrs. Chen that very afternoon. Veterans advocate Tom Bradley had reviewed the case over the phone and was confident that the family was entitled to significant benefits that had been delayed due to processing errors. At school, Ms. Patterson had arranged for Lily to meet with the grief counselor, Mrs. Williams, who had experience helping children process traumatic loss. The meeting was scheduled for after lunch, giving Lily time to adjust to the idea throughout the morning. During the lunch period, something remarkable happened. Instead of sitting alone and rationing her crackers, Lily was approached by 3 older students from Robert's bus route. They had been watching her struggle for weeks and had decided to take action. "Hey, Lily," said Jessica, a 6th grader who rode the bus every day. "We were wondering if you wanted to sit with us today." Lily looked surprised and a little scared, but she nodded and followed the older children to their table. Robert happened to be in the building delivering a message to the office when he saw this interaction through the cafeteria window. For the first time since he had known Lily, she was eating a full meal and even managed a small smile when one of the boys told a silly joke. The afternoon brought the first major breakthrough. Mrs. Williams, the grief counselor, had a gift for connecting with children who had experienced trauma. Instead of forcing Lily to talk about her feelings right away, she began by asking about her parents and what she remembered about them. "Tell me about your mommy and daddy," Mrs. Williams said gently. "What were they like?" For the first time in months, Lily's tears weren't tears of pure sadness. As she talked about her father's bedtime stories and her mother's pancake breakfasts, her crying was mixed with small smiles. She told Mrs. Williams about the stuffed elephant that her father had won for her at a carnival, and about how her mother used to sing while doing dishes. "It sounds like you have beautiful memories of them," Mrs. Williams said. "Those memories are yours to keep forever, and it's okay to feel happy when you think about the good times you had together." Meanwhile, Helen Rodriguez was at the Chen apartment, helping Mrs. Chen organize the mountain of paperwork that had been overwhelming her for months. What had seemed impossibly complicated to a grieving grandmother was actually a straightforward case that had been delayed by simple bureaucratic mistakes. "You've been filling out the right forms," Helen explained, "but they've been getting lost in the system because your son's military records were filed under a slightly different name spelling. Once we correct that, everything else should fall into place." Within 2 hours, Helen had identified over $3,000 in back benefits that the family was owed, plus ongoing monthly support that would ensure their financial stability. She also connected Mrs. Chen with a support group for grandparents who were raising grandchildren, and arranged for simplified meal delivery services while the family adjusted to their new reality. When Robert picked up Lily that afternoon, the change was immediately visible. She still chose her regular seat, and she still pulled out her notebook. But this time she spent part of the ride looking around the bus and even responding when other children spoke to her. The notebook remained important to her, but it no longer seemed like the only thing anchoring her to the world. "How was your day, Lily?" Robert asked as she prepared to get off the bus. Better, she said quietly, and Robert could hear that she actually meant it. Mrs. Chen was waiting at the bus stop with news of her own. Mr. Robert, she said, using the formal address that showed her respect and gratitude. I can't thank you enough for what you've done. Helen thinks we'll have everything sorted out within a few weeks, and she says there are programs that can help with groceries and after-school care. Over the following weeks, the entire community seemed to rally around Lily and her grandmother. Word had gotten out among the parents about the family's situation, and instead of treating them as objects of pity, the neighborhood responded with practical support and genuine friendship. The Johnsons, who lived in the same apartment complex, started including Mrs. Chen in their weekly grocery runs, making it easier for her to shop without leaving Lily alone. The Martinez family, whose daughter was in Lily's class, arranged regular playdates that gave both Lily social interaction and Mrs. Chen some much-needed rest. Robert's wife organized a clothing drive specifically for Lily, but she did it in a way that preserved the child's dignity instead of giving her used clothes. They set up a shopping experience where Lily could choose items she liked from a selection of new clothes that had been purchased with donated funds. The most significant change came when Mrs. Williams helped Lily find a healthy way to honor her parents' memory. Instead of keeping her memorial hidden under the bus seat, Lily worked with her grandmother to create a special memory corner in their apartment. The photographs, letters, and personal items were displayed openly, allowing both Lily and Mrs. Chen to grieve together instead of in isolation. Lily still wrote letters to her parents, but now they were part of a weekly session with Mrs. Williams, where she could express her feelings and memories in a therapeutic setting. The letters became less about desperate sadness and more about sharing her daily experiences and growth with parents she would always love. The hidden memorial under the bus seat was gradually and respectfully moved to its new home. Robert helped with this transition by acknowledging its importance to Lily while explaining that her parents' memory deserved a place of honor rather than a hiding spot. Your mommy and daddy were heroes, Robert told her one afternoon. Heroes deserve to be remembered in the light, not hidden in the dark. 3 months after that Friday afternoon when Robert first lifted Lily's bus seat, the transformation was remarkable. Lily still chose the same seat on the bus, but now it was because she enjoyed the routine, not because she was guarding a secret. She had made friends among her fellow passengers, and her daily tears had been replaced by conversations and occasional laughter. The most touching change was that Lily had started bringing extra snacks to share with other children, instead of hoarding food out of fear. When Robert asked her about this shift, her answer showed wisdom beyond her years. Mrs. Williams taught me that when we share good things with people, it makes the good things bigger instead of smaller, Lily explained. So I share my crackers because it makes them taste better. Mrs. Chen had also transformed from an overwhelmed, isolated grandmother into a confident advocate for her granddaughter. With proper benefits in place and a support network surrounding them, she was able to focus on healing and creating new traditions while honoring the memory of their lost family members. One spring morning, exactly 6 months after Robert had made his discovery, Lily boarded the bus with something different in her hands. Instead of her usual notebook, she carried a small wrapped package. "This is for you, Mr. Robert," she said, handing him the gift, "for noticing when I was sad and helping me not be sad anymore." Inside the package was a small photo frame containing a picture that Lily had drawn. It showed a yellow school bus with Robert behind the wheel, and in the seat that had once held her hidden memorial was a drawing of Lily smiling and surrounded by friends. At the bottom of the picture, in her careful handwriting, Lily had written, "Thank you for helping me remember that good people notice when kids need help, and that asking for help isn't the same as being a burden." As Robert placed the picture on his dashboard where he could see it every day, he realized that this experience had changed him as much as it had changed Lily. He had learned that sometimes the most important part of his job wasn't just driving safely from point A to point B, but paying attention to the silent struggles of the children in his care. The empty space under Lily's bus seat had been filled with new purpose. Now it held extra tissues for any child who needed them, a few emergency snacks for kids who forgot their lunch, and a small first aid kit. It had become a symbol of care rather than a hiding place for pain. Lily still missed her parents every day, and probably always would. But now she carried that love as a source of strength rather than a burden of sadness. She had learned that remembering the people you love doesn't have to hurt all the time, and that accepting help from caring adults doesn't make you weak or demanding. Most importantly, both Lily and Mrs. Chen had discovered that they weren't facing their challenges alone. A simple act of noticing, followed by the courage to take action, had connected them to a community of people who cared enough to help a grieving family rebuild their lives. Robert continued driving his route, but now he looked at every passenger with fresh eyes, knowing that any one of them might be carrying burdens too heavy for their young shoulders. And every morning when Lily boarded his bus with a smile instead of tears, he was reminded that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can create the biggest changes in a child's world.